what about a corporation, Jewish corporation? We'll have to see if there's a mitzvah to lend money to, let's say, a Mossad. Let's say a Jewish institution comes to you and says, we need to borrow money. We haven't seen that yet. Because like Shmuel points out, it says re'echa. It says your fellow. Or in Kesef Talve es Ami. Actually, it doesn't say, what does it say, re'echa? Not sure where the word re'echa appears in the psukim. That's right. I'm sure there were times. There were. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's continue in our journey through this mitzvah of lending money. Okay. So we saw the Imrei Yaakov about the mitzvah of taking collateral. There's nothing wrong with taking collateral. But what we do see from here is if the fellow does not have collateral, there's still an obligation for me to lend him. But he says, "Af below mashkan chiyavecha hakasuv lahalvos lo." Even without collateral, the Torah obligates you to lend him. V'davka imhu muchzak be'enav li'ish nemanu batuach bo. But that's only if you feel that you can trust this fellow. Odavka imavakesh mimenu halva'a mu'etes, or if he's only looking for a small loan. Because then you'll certainly be able to get your money back. But if it's a large amount of money that he needs to borrow, and you don't have full confidence in him, then the Torah does not obligate you to lend money on a bad bet. We saw this yesterday. Even if the lova wants to giving you a promissory note, it doesn't help the situation if he has no security. There's nothing to secure the loan with. He says if a person has real estate, right, then you have to see if that's enough of a collateral. It's not clear to me. He says, based in Adavar Pasha the Ein Mechuyev L'Lavoso B'li Mashkan. Rav Stern tells us a chiddush. He says this idea that there's a mitzvah asay to loan someone money when he doesn't have collateral is only when it used to be possible to guaranteed extract your money that is owed to you by going to Beis Din. Today, even if a Beis Din finds someone liable, there doesn't seem to be the same power of the Beis Din to enforce their judgment. And therefore, in Eno Muchzak Be'enav Lagaber de Parana, he says, and therefore, if this fellow is not trustworthy in your eyes, and you don't feel that he's going to make good on his promises, then you are not obligated to give him a loan that's of a sizable size without collateral. And he says, we'll see later some more in Sif A. Remember, we're still just in Sif Aleph, okay? So there's a lot of stuff here. Now, we had also seen that the reason why there's a special mitzvah of lending people money, that is, why does the Torah say to take collateral? Because if the poor person does not want to take gifts, he's proud, he doesn't want to take gifts from others, and he's embarrassed to take a loan, we tell him, bring collateral so that he will feel at least a sense of a quid pro quo at least. So that's the reason why the Torah says you're allowed to take collateral, is not because you always have to take collateral, but there are times when it'll be beneficial to the debtor for you to take his collateral because he'll feel in some sense, some level of redemption, that he's given something in exchange for the loan. He doesn't want to take gifts, and he also is embarrassed to borrow. Okay, so that's just the explanation of that little piece. And then we saw further in the halacha that even though the Torah talks about the classic case of a loan with an ani, there is also a mitzvah to lend money to an ashir. Ainli ela ani. Ashir shetzarach lilvos minayin shemitzvah lahalvos l'pisha. How do you know that even if the person has plenty of money? It's just that, you know what? It happens a lot. People who are well-to-do, need a stopgap loan. They need liquidity. That's the right word. They need liquidity, right? For 30 days because they're waiting for, they've just offloaded a huge amount of cash for a purchase, and now they're waiting to get a return on something, and they just don't have money to pay for the bills. For just
buy a house, there's a gap between
you need a bridge loan. You need a bridge loan. So how do you know that there's a mitzvah for a Jew to lend money in that case as well? So he says, Talmud Lomar es ami. He says, because it says my people. It's not just the poor people, it's my people in general. Right? So ba'afilu imba lefan of not. Oh, okay. So we'll get to that in just a minute. So lahalvosa usher shetzarich. Sorry. He says even if a wealthy person could always sell off his assets in order to become liquid, in order to get cash, but that's not a reason for you to say, why should I lend you money? You could always sell off your boat or whatever. He says, he says, because since he doesn't have liquidity this moment, if you can help him and prevent him from selling his boat, so that just as he has liquidity for the time being, that's still a mitzvah to help him. Yeah, right. That's right. Lahalvosa lefisha, to lend him money temporarily. Nira sharot salomar bedavka lefisha. So he says, and it seems like the Rav Shulchan Aruch uses this language of lahalvosa lefisha, to lend him temporarily, is because a person of means should not be taking out a long-term loan. He says, "Avaloli zman rab." The after minin shegam ba'asher sheyesh lo nechasam yesh mitzvah lahalvosa bisman shechasam lo mizumanim. Because even though we say that if a person's not liquid, even if he's a person of means, there's still a mitzvah to lend him money. Mikol makom zerak lefisha, but only short-term loans. Avaloli zman rab, but not for a long term. Because if a person has plenty of assets, then what should he do? Instead of borrowing money from other people for long-term loans, he should sell off some of his assets. He says because then he should sell the boat. Like if he needs a year in order to find liquidity again, and he's got a boat that's worth tens of thousands of dollars, then he shouldn't be taking out a loan for that long of a time. Yeah. Yeah. And so the question is, what does short-term mean? So he says, anything less than 30 days is a short-term loan. But he says it's not 100% clear. In other words, there's still some gray area here. But in other words, there's down and out in Beverly Hills, right? So a person may find themselves in a situation where they just don't have liquidity for a certain amount of time. And there are certain kinds of industries where it's feast or famine, right? I don't know, what's an example of an industry like that? Certain real estate kinds of industries. Yeah, seasonal kinds of things. So you have to look at a situation, and if you have confidence in this person, and he asks you for a loan even for more than 30 days, so then, perhaps you should lend him the money, but then take security from him. You say, okay, your boat is your collateral, or however you want to put it. Okay. Tamulomar es ami, because it says my people, my nation, and it doesn't just say the poor. The midakas of stam es ami velo miet elalakum. The pasuk therefore is only excluding the Gentile. In other words, there's only a mitzvah to lend money to Jews. There's no mitzvah to lend money to non-Jews. Shema minei, the mitzvahs asehi lahalvos afilu la'arsha. So we see that there's a mitzvah to lend money to the wealthy. Atzarach lefi sha'a ela sha'ani kodem lo, who needs the money temporarily. The only thing is that we should know that if you have limited funds and you can either give a loan to a poor person or to a wealthy person, the poor person takes priority, because basically the Torah's attitude is always help the underdog first. Help the underprivileged before you help the privileged. But if you can help both, or the aniyim are already taken care of by a gemach in your community, this guy is a personal friend and he really needs your help, so help him out. Okay, and you're doing a mitzvah in the process. Okay. And then the Rav Shulchan Aruch had said that if two people come before you to borrow money, one is a Jew and one is a non-Jew, and the Jew you can only lend him money without interest, and the non-Jew you lend money you can charge interest. He says, "HaYisrael Kodem." The Jew comes first, even if the Jew is a person of means, but he just needs the money temporarily. The Yisrael Asher Bechinam HaYisrael Kodem. He says, "V'nechleku haposkim b'halacha." The poskim disagree on this particular halacha. Yesh omrim da'afilu im yalve lenachri yilo mimenu revach meruba mikol makom chiyavo hator lahalvos liyisrael bechinam. Some look at it very straightforward, just like straight, and they say, look, if you could make a lot of money, you could draw a huge amount of interest from the loan that you give to the non-Jew, but the Jew also needs that money. You have a mitzvah to forego the interest that you would make with the non-Jew and give the loan to the Jew instead. Because, as the argument goes, you're not losing money, you're just forsaking the opportunity to earn a profit. Well, that's not the way, right? That's not the way the halacha looks at it. Look, I have a bank account, and I have, let's say, a few $1,000s in my bank account. Okay, it's sitting there. Am I losing money by not the interest that's being paid out now is paltry, right? And in some bank accounts, there's no interest being paid on it at all. So, am I losing money if I lend the money? Right. It's forsaking an opportunity to make money. It's not losing money, though. And that's the distinction that's drawn in the poskim. So that's the first opinion. The first opinion is take it at face value. And even though you're going to lose out on the opportunity to make a profit, you're still obligated to lend the Jew the money. But v'yesh cholkim says there are others who disagree. And they say that only when there's a relatively small amount of profit to be made by making the loan to the non-Jew. But if the profit that you stand to make is significant by either lending the money or investing the money with a non-Jew, so then you no longer have an obligation to use that money and loan it out instead. Now, let's say that's how you make your money. In other words, you're a money lender. That's what you do professionally. And there are people who have businesses where they finance companies, right? I'm a financier. And a financier, by definition, has to maintain liquidity in order to lend out money to people and collect interest. That's what finance companies do. When you call yourself a financing company, it's a very sophisticated way, basically, of saying you're a money lender, right? But yeah, money lenders have a bad rap, and that's why venture capitalist, right? So But that's a very old traditional occupation for Jews because there were many times in Jewish history when we couldn't do anything else. We couldn't own land, right? We couldn't deal in merchandise, so we had to be money lenders. Okay, so anyway, if that's what you do professionally, then you're not obligated to lose parnasa. See, that's there you're losing, right? And that's the distinction. Next. Now, the next part we saw in the Rav Shulchan Aruch is in tzarech lahotzi hamos leparnasaso v'dei machzoro v'lo lahalvos l'nachrim beribis o b'shar masu matan. He says, let's see, Yisrael asher b'chinam ha'Yisrael kodem in tzarech lahotzi hamos leparnasaso v'dei machzoro v'lo lahalvos l'nachrim beribis o b'shar masu matan. He says. Lahotzi hamos laparnasaso v'dei machzaro. I think he's talking about if the borrower needs the money for his parnasa and to be able to make up his shortfall, in just being able to take care of his basic essential needs. That's where the Yisrael takes priority in lending him money. Right? V'lo lahalvos l'nachrim beribis. But if the Jew comes to you and says, "I need to borrow money," why? Oh, I found a great opportunity to lend money to a non-Jew. He's willing to pay a huge amount of interest. So you want me to lend you the money so you can make a profit? Why don't I just lend my money to the guy so I can make the profit? In other words, the only time that there's a mitzvah for me to lend you money is if you need it in order to cover your basic living expenses. But if you need the money in order to invest in it in an enterprise, and you don't want to sell your boat to do it, but you'd rather borrow the money, so then I'm not mechuyev, according to this line, to lend you the money. Okay, shenemar es ami kodem lenachri, and so this is all based on the pasuk that says there's a mitzvah to lend money to my people, and so therefore my people take priority before lending it to a non-Jew. So what does the Imrei Yaakov say? Im tzarech lahotzi hamos leparnasaso v'dei machzaro. Nira lechoira de dafka b'chei agavna sheyesh lefanav nachri sheyuchol lahalvoso beribis o shar mekach umemkar or masa umatan. He says we're talking about a situation where I can either lend you. Let's say I have a stash of, let's say, $10,000 of disposable income that's just sitting in my bank account. I have 10,000, so I can either lend you the money interest-free, and you can invest that money in some venture, or I have a business venture that I could use, which is to either lend it to a Gentile on interest or to invest it myself. So in that kind of situation, bazeh ein ha'asher kodem. So you don't take priority. I'm allowed to use the money for my own investment purposes instead of lending you money. So rak kishuhu nitzrach leparnasaso v'dei machzora. It's only when you, my friend who's of means but is not liquid this month, you need it just to basically cover your groceries and your rent. That's when I have a mitzvah to lend you money. Aval heicha she'en lo memelo shum efsharos laharbiach ba'atzmo. Agam deha'asher bo lilvos l'tzarech asakav mikol makom chayav lahalvos lo lefi shav etzarech. But let's say my money is just sitting there. I don't have any other investment opportunities. I haven't, nothing's come my way. My money's just sitting in the bank. You come to me and you say, listen, I have a business opportunity. Would you mind lending me the money? I actually had a situation like that. Actually, it was $10,000. A guy came to me and said, I'm looking for investors. I had this little chunk. And I said, okay, I'm not using it right now. Go ahead. I said, but we need to draw up paper. We need to draw up a promissory note to make sure that, I can collect. He gave me a promissory note, trusted the guy. A year and a half later, he finally paid me back, right? In other words, because I told him, My wife got upset with me because I said, what are you bothering him for? I don't need it. And his investment wasn't as successful as he thought it was going to be. But he had enough liquidity that he could pay me back the loan. So my wife finally prevailed. And I told him I needed the money. So I got the money back. But, so good. And so it could be that even that in that situation, there's a mitzvah to lend the person the money, because if you don't need it and you don't have your own endeavor that you want to invest in, so then why shouldn't you lend him the money, even if he's coming to you for an investment opportunity? Okay, that's something that we discussed when we first learned this halacha. Lefarnasasa v'dei machzoro. He needs it for his parnasa, for his basic essential needs. Pirish lo rak halva'a mu'etes lahachayos nefashos beisa lepisha, ela hakavana hi b'halva meruba shiucha lases v'lases bo laharbiach parnasasa. He says the guy is looking not just for enough money to cover his living expenses, but he's looking for a large loan so that he can expand his business, right? Right? But as we said before, if he doesn't need it to cover his basic living expenses, but he's got an opportunity to expand his business, to invest in new machinery, whatever it is, and he wants to know if I can lend him the money, but I could use that money to lend to a Gentile or to some other money-making enterprise. His business ventures do not take priority over my business ventures. That's the bottom line. Okay, and so we basically see from the pasuk, "Umatal mulomar es ha'ani lahaktim ani la'asher." Why then does the Torah use the example of the ani? To teach me that if I have two people who come to me for a loan, one is an ani and one is an ashir, the ani takes priority. Wrote Salomar, the gam b'makom sheka'ez shneim nitzrachim lamos ba'ofen shaveh. In other words, even if both of them equally need the money, shegam la'asher ein lo ka'ez mos muzumanim litzarach parnasasu machzora. In other words, the person of means also doesn't have any liquidity, and if he doesn't get money, he's going to go hungry this month, and he's going to default on his rent or whatever it is. But at the same time, a poor person who doesn't have any assets at all is coming to me at the same time for a loan. So you have to say to the person of means, I'm really sorry, but I have to give priority to this fellow who's an ani because he really mamish has nothing. Now, and furthermore, says the Imrei Yaakov, even if the person of means is a relative of yours and he lives locally, but the ani is not local and he's not a relative, the ani still takes priority. Okay, the stama amru ani va'ashir, ani kodem, because whenever the rabbis said the ani takes priority, they did not qualify it at all. Here's an interesting additional halacha. Let's say two people come to you for a loan. One needs to buy, they're both aniyim. One needs it for clothing, and the other one needs it for food. Who takes priority? The food takes priority, because food is a more essential staple of a person's livelihood than clothing. No, I'm saying that he's not naked. He's wearing shemata, right? No, like if a guy comes to you and says, can I borrow money to buy a new suit for my daughter's wedding? I don't have, versus I need Shabbos food, right? So now, what if a guy has enough money for Shabbos food, but he wants to borrow money? I have sometimes some moral misgivings about lending people money. If a guy says, I'm making a chasana for my daughter, and he wants to make a wedding that is more lavish than I would make for my own child. He would want to borrow money, right? You know something? It is my business. If he's asking me for a loan, I think I do have a right to say, where are you making the wedding? It's going to be at the Ritz-Carlton, right? So, and you want to borrow money from me to make a wedding at the Ritz-Carlton? So you don't think I have a right to ask him? Of course I do, right? I'm giving you obviously an exaggerated example, but you can certainly appreciate that there are people who live above their means in order to keep up with the Joneses or the Schwartzes or whoever they're trying to keep up with. And right? And they borrow money inappropriately. Okay. And so this is I think, as we go further on in these halachas, I'd like to expand on that idea, because there's definitely an issue, not in Thornhill. I don't think this exists in Thornhill, thank God, because people are very simple in their, in the way that they live in Thornhill, thank God. But in other Jewish communities, for now, but in other Jewish communities, you come under pressure, because all of your friends are making weddings that have the sushi, and they have the open bar, and all of these, and they have the carving station, and all of these things end up costing, big money. And if you would eliminate the carving station and the sushi and the open bar, you would save something in the area of $25,000-$30,000 without exaggeration, right? Would anyone like to challenge me on these figures? Because these are the figures that I'm familiar with, right?
And people would have enough money to make the wedding a basic wedding themselves.
And to make a basic wedding, right, they would have. But how pasnish to make a wedding without a carving station?
Even if it's to spend an extra $1 million on a car, you invited to the wedding? Right.
The question is, are you allowed to go to the wedding? Because you're not allowed to take ribbis. You're not allowed to take interest on the loan. So I lent you money for that carving station. If I take food from the carving station, maybe and then I'm expecting you to pay me back. So then maybe I'm not allowed to eat from that carving station. All right. Anyway. Listen, so Moshe's point is legitimate as well. Maybe I don't have a right to, or maybe the guy comes to me, he's in a time of need, emotional need, psychological need, he wants to borrow the money. But essentially what you're seeing from here is that if there are other mitzvahs that you can do with this money, right? You don't have unlimited funds. There are other mitzvahs that you can do. You have that $10,000. The guy is coming to all of his friends, borrowing from each guy 10 grand so that he can make a lavish wedding. You have a right to say, you know what? I'm not such a wealthy guy. I have the disposable 10 grand, but I think I'd rather give it to a gemach, the Free Loan Society, instead of giving it to this guy who needs his carving station. Okay?
They don't all sit at the same table.
What do you mean they don't all sit at, all the lenders? At the wedding, right. Anyway, you basically see that there is a hierarchy of need in this halacha. It's always about judgment calls. Life is all about making judgment calls, and you have to try and be as objective as you can. But anyway, this is the one thing that is sticking in my head, maybe correctly so, maybe incorrectly so. You'll tell me if I feel making a mistake, and we'll continue.